During the late 18th century, American society experienced a decline in religious values. One of the first indications were shown when the clergy feared that the importance of religious values were diminishing. This sparked the revival of not only religious movements, but many reforms as well, known as the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening had the greatest impact on society during the 19th century. It led to the spread of religious movements, gave women a greater role in society, and provided new opportunities for African Americans. The revival of religious movements began in England towards the end of the 18th century and spread to America. Among one of the first and most impacted areas was in New York, specifically the burned over district, which was the center for these revivals. There, revivalists challenged a more Calvinist theology and methods, creating a new wave of religious enthusiasm. Another important aspect of religious reform is the camp meetings. These were revival meetings held outdoors lasting for several days. Originating in Kentucky, camp meetings started when James McGready organized a communion service in Gasper Ridge that gained much support. The most famous one was led by Martin W. Stone at Cane Ridge, Kentucky. Thousands of people attended, people of all races and classes. Preachers preached every single day, creating a great amount of religious excitement. Thereafter, Methodists adopted camp meetings because of how successful it was, later making them one of the largest denominations by 1840. Another example of the spread of religion was through the system of circuit riders. These were clergymen who would ride on horseback, gathering crowds and preaching sermons. They would travel several miles preaching their religion and emotionally touching people's hearts as they go. Circuit riders were another reason why Methodism was able to expand and become a large denomination. Finally, religious reform is shown in how much it has spread not only in America, but to other countries as well. The New York Tract Society was created to spread God's word to the unchurched. They printed pamphlets with Bible stories and moral messages. Students from a ministry at Andover Seminary wanted to spread their religion. These men were inspired by reading the work in a religious press and by a Hawaiian native, Henry Abukia, who became a convert. His conversion was a sign of the possibilities of spreading religions abroad. The American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions was soon founded and published materials and raised money to support this work of spreading the religion. Judson was one of the founders of the board, and he and his wife went to India and stayed there for 38 years to work as the first of many foreign missions. These efforts spread news of not only Christianity but also America. A group of English Baptists also formed a missionary society and sent some to India and other countries. Other Protestants followed the same path, and Americans were actively participating in a worldwide movement of Christianization. Another example of how the Second Great Awakening affected society is shown through women's rights reform. Women lacked many basic legal rights and economic rights, were deprived of proper education, and rarely took part in public life. But when the Second Great Awakening occurred, women began to gain more momentum. Among the leading figures were Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. After being denied the opportunities to speak their views at a World Anti-Slavery Society meeting, they formed the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. This was the first national women's rights conventions in which men and women participated in. There, a declaration of sentiments and resolutions was made, stating that all women and men are created equal. It also called for a repeal of the laws that allowed unequal treatment of women, along with better education opportunities and the right for women to control wages and property. Because of the patriarchal attitudes that were regarded towards women to be inferior to men, the idea that women needed to be more active in religious instruction became one of their motives. Women took on roles within the church. In fact, most of the church membership was made up of women. Their active role in the church gave them a new sense that their activities were equal to that of men. The Great Awakening also produced hundreds of female converts who took part in countless reforms. Providing for the poor became one of their goals. In 1797, the Poor Widows with Small Children was established by Isabella Graham. This organization recruited women to give food, clothes, and fuel to those in need. They taught them household management and instructed them in religion. Other organizations led by women set up relief societies, orphanages, charity schools, and many more. Education was also one of the greatest reforms that women took part in. Before, schools only taught women about household matters, manners, posture, and provided them with just enough education to read the Bible, and not much else. After the religious revival, churches gave them a new place in society where they could be considered as equal to men. Women demanded to be taught subjects such as algebra, history, science, geography, and many more, just like men were. Women reformers like Catherine Beecher and many others used their own female academies to promote an environment for women to learn beyond the expected limits. These efforts and events had a long lasting effect on society. In the 1900s, an amendment was passed that allowed women to vote. Schools today provide equal education to both males and females. Women are no longer confined to their household, and they have more opportunities to participate in the same roles that men do. Finally, African Americans were also affected by the Second Great Awakening. During this time, slavery was still an issue and blacks had little rights. Less religious opposition to slavery and other anti-black developments led to the rise of independent black denominations, along with the belief that African American Christians could be more successful than whites. They began fighting for greater freedom in worship and leadership of the church. The first independent black churches and denominations occurred during this time. Due to the unequal treatment by white Methodists, the African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded by Richard Allen. They proclaimed biblical doctrines of equality and protested against white supremacy. They also called for the need for more attention to blacks. Although churches were joint but segregated, African Americans were still very active in the church. Another way the roles of blacks changed can be seen through education when Daniel Payne established the Wilberforce University. This was the first black college started by African Americans and the first of many colleges founded by the AME. Before, blacks were very limited in their availability to education, but with the growth of new values and the belief that it was unchristian to enslave blacks, these views began to change. By stressing the moral need to end sinful practices and each person's responsibility to uphold God's will in society, preachers like Charles G. Finney led massive religious revivals in the 1820s that led the way to later emergence of abolition reforms. With the Second Great Awakening came a wave of religious reform, a fight for women's rights, and greater participation of African Americans within the church. Not only that, but there were education reforms, changes in women's roles within the household and the church, and the expansion of religion in America and elsewhere. The vastness of how far these movements took place, along with its lasting effect, is what makes the Great Awakening the most impactful event on society of the 19th century.